I have been patiently waiting all year to do this review for the brand new REL Acoustics S850 subwoofer. And that is because I do love good subwoofers and what they add to an audio system, because it's very tangible, it's very tactile, it's very obvious what they add. And yeah, I do love good subwoofers. The S series is a very popular range of subwoofers from REL Acoustics, and I know this because of my calibration work. I know many people that own one or multiples of them, and I think that is because of the balance between their performance and their styling. And I think REL do get this. If we are expected to have these big, often black boxes in our home, the nicer they look, the easier it is, of course, to have them, and especially to have multiples of them. So this is important, style is important, and I think REL do get it. And I'm sure REL used to say the S stood for serious, but I actually think the S should now stand for style because, well, look at it. REL have managed to find another way to reinvent the box to make it look even nicer and more stylish than before. And I think it's the combination of the handles and their colour and how they are set off by the recess areas for your hands, but also it's the grooves and how they have been cut into the cabinet. And yes, this looks familiar to what has come before from REL, but only from the much more expensive number 31 and number 32 that I lived with a pair of for about a year. So maybe that is why this visual detail really stands out to me, but I think it does make a difference. And if I throw up a couple of clips from my S510 review from back in July 2022, the former range is still very nice looking. But REL, I think, have been able to significantly improve the look of the new range, and that is impressive. I like the attentions to detail for the REL plaque on the top and how the finish on that is just really very nice. And how that finish is then mirrored with the S850 plaque that sits on top of the grille. And extra touches of quality like this we will inevitably take for granted, but I think they will make a difference to how you feel about spending a premium amount of money on a subwoofer as is being asked by REL. While I'm speaking about the grills, you may have seen some images of the new S series with a wood grill, and I really wanted to see one of these in the flesh. But for the 850 and smaller 550, the wood grill is an optional extra that costs about £450, so it's a lot of money extra being asked. However, if you're looking to pair this with any of the newer retro designed speakers that are out there, and there are of course a lot of them, then I think paying the extra money to get a closer visual match might well be worth it to you. But I know that I am tight, so I would probably not do it. And I actually like to go commando anyway, because I like to see the drivers on speakers and subwoofers, because I like to see the cones moving. I think it's cool, but most speaker cones don't really move much anymore, and subwoofer drivers with the right content, they move quite a lot. So, being able to see the drivers, I like it. I think it's cool. The included grills are very heavy and well-made things, so I can't see many having any complaints about them, but I question with this white finish, would it look better if the lugs that hold the grill were also white and not black? Let's talk specifics. The S850 uses a front-firing active 12-inch driver with a down-firing 12-inch passive radiator, being driven by an 850 watt RMS Class D amplifier. The front-firing driver cone is made from what REL call a carbonalloy, and it has a pure carbon fibre centre cap instead of aluminium. And REL say these changes make the driver lighter and stiffer. Beefcaking the over 40 kilogram lump up so you can see the 12-inch carbon glass fibre flat passive radiator that REL say is 40% stiffer and lighter than the last range, and it has 60mm of travel in each direction. From the back, there is the expected REL amplifier plates, and the colour may have changed, but the suite of connections and controls really has not changed much, at least as far back as I can remember. So if you know REL subwoofers, everything here will be familiar to you and easy for you to set up. And if you are new to this, I think it's mostly pretty self-explanatory, but REL as a manufacturer do publish a lot of guides and they make a lot of setup videos and advice videos. So fair play to them for that. I think other manufacturers should take note of this. And one thing I noticed about the 850 is if you're familiar with the REL kind of click system, the click controls here, they were all very obviously stepped. Like it was very easy to, click between the different level settings. And I have found on some older REL subwoofers that the step's not always quite so clicky, and sometimes you make 2 adjustments when you mean to make 1. And I'm probably just being very clumsy, but like the controls here were very nice. More interesting to many will be the Class D amplifier that's on the other side of the amplifier plate that we can't see. REL say they are still using what they call a traditional power supply. And to me, that means they are using a toroidal transformer based power supply, which are large, they're heavy, and I would assume much more expensive to manufacture than a switching power supply, especially when we're talking about a large amplifier, one that can deliver 850 watts RMS power and 1000 watts peak. So I'm assuming there's a pretty sizable toroidal transformer in there, which again is more expensive and heavy, and this attention to detail will appeal to certain audiophiles. As will the fact that REL say that the crossover filters that they are using in the 850, and these are one of the reasons hi-fi enthusiasts buy REL subwoofers, as these make REL's high-level connection work. And the filters being used here use better quality components, such as higher quality film capacitors taken from what REL call their flagship subwoofers, the number 30s. So that is nice to know, and it's great to get trickle-down technology. We all love that. So who is the REL S850 for? Well, I think for starters, we need to consider the price, which is £3,599 or £4,048 if you want the optional wood grille. So this is, of course, a serious amount of money for a subwoofer, especially when we start to think about maybe going with matching stereo pairs or a full 6-pack line array, because then you're talking over 20 grand. So this is serious money for subwoofers. So clearly, these are aimed at very serious, I think, passionate music and or movie lovers. But I think this is likely to be someone's second subwoofer. Maybe you've started with a smaller, more affordable subwoofer and you're looking to kind of level up, looking to get more performance from them. So maybe you've got a REL T3 or 5, maybe 7 or 9 subwoofer now, and you're looking for more performance, more output, more energy, more in a lot of ways actually, but without sacrificing or giving up any style and without going too large in physical size. But you should also factor in REL do recommend certain subwoofers as pairing best with certain speakers, and you can check their recommendations for free with a tool on their website, as maybe this would be someone's first subwoofer depending on what speakers you have. And it could also be their last subwoofer too, because REL do service all of their subwoofers dating back to those manufactured in the early days. And I have seen this for myself. I've met the team of engineers at REL that do the service, and I've met them a number of times. So this is something that I think is good to know. What is a very good subwoofer? I think that is the ultimate question that's not that easy to answer, because it will mean something different to different people. I know some people like the raw data, take a subwoofer out into a field, measure its maximum performance and judge it based on that. And I can understand why that can be useful. These days, I care more about what happens when I place a subwoofer in this room and try and integrate it into a 2-channel or HiFi system. And how easy is it for me to achieve the level of bass performance that I expect, that I'm looking for? I find that crucially important for me personally. And for testing the S850, I was hoping to have the former S812 here to be able to compare it against. And unfortunately, I couldn't get one. And I actually don't have a reference subwoofer set up here either. So can this review of the S850 be classed as a review, or is it more of a show and tell type of video? I think only you can decide. So I've been judging the S850 based on my expectations and experience of having set up many subwoofers for many people. And I've had a lot of subwoofers in this exact same room over the last 15 plus years. And I did all of my review testing for 2-channel music only using REL's high-level connection, which is a speaker-level connection straight from the back of my esoteric power amplifier, using a REL baseline blue high-level cable. And in my recent subwoofer reviews, I've placed the subwoofer more in the middle of the room to try and better remove my room's acoustics from what I hear. And I did test that, but I actually spent more time with the S850 placed in more of a user-typical spot, with it sat next to the speakers, and I didn't really hear too much difference between the placements, and that proved to me that this is a very transparent sounding subwoofer, even played louder than was sensible for the speakers. Because one of my pet hates with subwoofers is when you can audibly locate where the bass is coming from, aka hear it's coming from the subwoofer itself. And I didn't have that issue here at all, not even once. That doesn't mean every single bass note I had and heard was 100% perfect, and that is because of the room I'm listening in. This room is massively, extensively acoustically treated, but it's still a small room, so it still has some effect. And I did listen through a ton of different music, from stupid bass heavy tracks like Bass I Love You, and some drum and bass, and some electronic and reggae, where you expect a subwoofer to make a big improvement from adding more bass. But I also listened to all sorts of different non-bass heavy music tracks, from commercial to some light jazz and some audiophile stuff and all sorts. And there was a number of things that I noticed. Firstly, it seems like with modern produced music, there's a lot more heavy bass in it than you might expect. Like the 2020s are making up for the 80s lack of bass in a lot of music. But what I noticed with the S850 in the system is there was a greater sense of energy to all music, old and new. Energy and like dynamism and liveliness, which was interesting because I wasn't quite expecting that. I expect, to add a subwoofer for a more fleshed out sound, for a more full-bodied and full and complete balance of sound overall, and to maybe extend soundstage and add scale and drama to the sense of music, all of those things. But to add liveliness and energy to the music, that is something a little different. And I can only put this down to the fact that bass is the music's foundation and the beat leads the way. And REL mentioning making in the drivers lighter and stiffer in the 850 and having better filters, this has made the 850 sound different, I think, to what I expected. It's fast and agile, I expected that, but there is a little bit of a caged animal aspect to how it sounds too, where it seems like it's always waiting to just give you a bass hammering with the right music. Which I know seems kind of funny in a way, and I've kind of worded it to be a little bit funny as well, because this is a hard thing to try and describe, because I was listening to the 850 at times thinking, wow, this is a really delicate sounding subwoofer, and calling a subwoofer delicate is a bit of a misnomer in itself, isn't it? But like it just nimbles along with really nice bass details, but there's always like this reserve, like this caged animal like wants to come out and give you a hammering. And because it's a little bit delicate in the way it presents bass, I was finding I was just creeping the volume up just a little bit more, to try and let's unleash the animal. So it reminded me more of a muscular and more dramatic T9X subwoofer than I remember S-series subwoofers sounding, which is again just from memory, but my memory of S-series subwoofers was they are a little heavier sounding with a more what I called a voluptuous sounding bass, and the 850 is not really like that. It sounds more pistonic, and maybe then comes over a touch drier as a result. But I didn't get any obvious bass lingering or heaviness, even at low volumes. And at loud volumes, the room can cause bass ringing, of course. But the 850 transitioned between the higher and lower bass notes more like a T9X, so very light on its feet and very nimble, like I say, delicate in the way it does it. But always with a sense of I can really hammer you now if you want to with the next track. And I tested the 850 with the crossover set high and low and the volume set high and low. And I didn't really notice any limitation there within reason. And I think that is really useful to know, because if you're looking to pair the S850 with some smaller satellite speakers or some smaller stand mount speakers, well then you might want to use a higher crossover and get a lot of the bass from the subwoofer, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I actually like to use a higher crossover on larger speakers too. And I know some people think that's a bad way to go. That's fine by them. But I like a higher crossover because I like the way it extends the effect of that bass audibly higher up in the soundstage, if you get it right, if you get the setup just right. More importantly, the 850 had no problem playing with the crossover set around 12 o'clock, and I didn't really test any higher than that, but it was fast enough and clean enough sounding to deliver the higher frequency bass to keep up with a fast speaker, and that is good to know. And I did a number of on-off tests, and I always missed the REL when you took it out because, obviously it adds a sense of drama and scale and like bass dynamism to the sound of music, but it also was fleshing out the vocals a little bit more to make them sound a little sweeter, and I was also getting a greater sense of well knitted together soundstage. So when there's like stuff happening across the soundstage, that all felt kind of more joined together and less falsely separated. And that's a really big difference that a good subwoofer adds. But on top of that, it was also adding like a sense of liveliness and kind of dynamics and like energy to the music as well. So of course you take that away, anybody is going to miss it. And it's that kind of liveliness, that drama. It's how the S850 was making the bass to be its own little extra dynamic, vivid, lively thing happening as part of the music. That's the bit that I really wasn't expecting to be quite so well done, I think is probably the best way to put it, because like bass is the foundation to the music, and when it becomes extra special, this extra lively, extra kind of enjoyable thing, that does stand out. And I could control this to some degree with the subwoofer placement, but really it was with the volume level, because listening to the system at very low volumes, aka late at night, I could raise the bass a bit and the system still sounded very full and dynamic and lively. And this is one of the great benefits of having subwoofers in a system, that extra level of fine control. In terms of bass output, one S850 was enough. It delivered enough bass for this smaller listening room, because maybe it doesn't look it on camera, but this is a small room, very acoustically treated, but still small. And one S850 was enough in terms of its bass output through the whole frequency range, really. But I definitely would have preferred two, because two just allows you to set things up a little differently, and I think I could have achieved a better result. But given the output of one S850, I was thinking, would two of the smaller 550s be enough for this room? And they probably would be. However, what I did like about the 850 was the way it handled deeper notes very cleanly, like really clean, the way it was handling the deeper bass notes. And I often think that is related to driver size and power. And obviously the 850 has a bigger driver and more power. In saying that, do I think this is the best sub for the money? If all you listen to is music like Bass I Love You, probably not. But for those who listen to maybe more civilized music, I think the articulation of the 850 will impress you, and how it delivers fast bass notes with a very clean authority. And that's the bit that stood out to me as well. It's definitely a little different to what I expected, and that is where a comparison would have been perfect, and I can only apologize for not being able to do that. And getting bass nailed for any audio system in a room is the hardest thing you can ever do, but it's so important because it adds so much. And any subwoofer that makes that process easier gets a tick in my book. And I think the modern RELs have been doing that. Although I do think the T9X subwoofers that I've had in this room were a little easier to set up, but that might be just because they don't do quite as much, they don't output quite as much. But interestingly, setting up the S850, it felt more like a T9X to me in terms of what I was doing, how I was positioning it, and what I was looking to get out of it. Felt more like a T9X, just like a more of a caged animal with more capability. So I think that's important to know if you're coming from maybe a T, as I mentioned, especially like a newer T9X, and you want to step up to a more capable subwoofer. I think you'll be off to a very good start, because setting it up will be very similar. Again, that's good to know. While I'm speaking about that, I do still have maybe the same complaint that I've had for all RELs below the 30 series, and that there is... Now, I don't care about an app control or remote control or anything like that. I don't care about that. I'm happy to get off my arse and go and make the settings changes. But what I'm thinking is, as REL subwoofers are getting more powerful, they're getting more capable, having some kind of EQ built into them, just so we can trim just a little bit where the room is doing just a little bit too much, like what you get in the 30 series, that would be like really fantastic. That would be really great. But sadly, we haven't got that in this new range. So look, I can make the same complaint and keep asking for it, because if you don't ask, you don't get. So maybe this review hasn't been, 100% perfect, but hopefully you've still enjoyed it. Hopefully you've still found it useful. If you have, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel to see more.